All right, I'm back live here. Hopefully, they haven't censored me just yet. Let me know if it's cutting you off. So I'll give a few minutes here to regain some of the people that we lost when YouTube cut us off, and possibly Facebook as well. Chris, thanks for coming back. That's the first time that I've ever been censored. Hell, I haven't been censored by Facebook yet that I know of. And here I've been. I mean, there's some crazy stuff on Facebook. I mean, YouTube. I mean, there's some crazy videos that people make on YouTube. I don't know why they would have censored me. And I think, didn't I just say that the governor might get my internet connection cut off? Why didn't I think that the more likely route that the governor is? I mean, hell, he's a billionaire, right? He probably knows these tech guys in Silicon Valley. They cut off my YouTube feed, literally. So thanks for coming back. I actually am honored that they felt it necessary to censor me on YouTube. I mean, I think there's some. I think there's some. I mean, that's like a major award, as the father said in A Christmas Story. A major award for me, so I appreciate that. But all I wanted to do really is to give an update on what was going on and the litigation against the West Virginia governor regarding the mask mandate. So, in a nutshell, Friday the 13th, he made threats threatening to arrest people, directing law enforcement to arrest people. And that got a lot of people outraged on social media, including myself. And by Monday, I already had filed a emergency motion for a temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction in federal court on the existing federal case I already had on behalf of the restaurant in Putnam County. Now, the federal court ordered the governor to respond by Thursday of this week, which he did. And then I got to reply by today. And I just finished our reply minutes before I tried to go live the first time and got censored. But the reply was filed today. And the next thing that happens is we have court currently still on for Monday morning at 10 o'clock at the federal courthouse in Huntington, West Virginia. I probably should take the guy having fun's comment off. All right. So what I was trying to say before is that if you're interested in reading the actual response that the governor's lawyers provided to the federal court, or the reply that I just wrote on behalf of my clients and just filed, you can go to the website at thecivilrightslawyer.com, and it's posted, the first post right there. So, governor's response to our federal mask mandate challenge. The first document there is actually the entire document of the governor's response, written by his private lawyers, not the West Virginia Attorney General's office. And you can read it and come to your own conclusions, but you'll see sort of, it's almost a Cliff Notes version of what I thought about it in our reply, because I only had today to work on it, and I had other things I couldn't avoid having to do today, other fires to put out. So that's about as much as I could do in one day, and I did the best I could with the time that I had. But I focused on just the strongest points I wanted to make, because you get the last word in writing when you file a motion like we did. You file your brief, they get to respond, and then as the person who is asking for the motion, you get to do what's called a reply, and that is basically to get the last word in. And then the court can either just rule off the written motions and responses, or the court can have a hearing and have oral argument over it. Apparently, that's what's going to happen on Monday morning. But the civilrightslawyer.com, that's where you can read those. And you can also read the original motion itself if you keep reading down the posts. And you can also read about the state law lawsuit that I'm working on as well, because this was just a federal lawsuit that was already pending. on behalf of the restaurant, but we're going to have another state court challenge, which includes more plaintiffs than just a restaurant. So we're talking 6 West Virginia legislators. We're talking some representative businesses such as restaurants, maybe gyms, and possibly a church, and some individuals. And it's gonna hit all the bases of representing people who have been affected in different ways by some of the governor's executive orders. And we're going to mount a state law challenge, which is much stronger than any federal challenge, because as you'll see, as they put in their response, they say, oh, well, these federal courts all over the country have denied all these federal legal constitutional challenges to these emergency powers, all except for this one judge, federal judge in the Western District of Pennsylvania. And they sort of denigrate him, in my opinion, and they call his order an aberration. And of course, we are asking this court to do much the same thing as the court in Pennsylvania did. So they are. It's more difficult to win on the federal constitutional level with the facts that we have, because the major violation that we can prove that the governor has engaged in is violating the state constitution, because he's acting as if he's the legislature. And the state constitution says that you can't do that. So it looks like we got a lot of people did come back, and I guess it's still on. So that's crazy. I can't imagine what did I do different then than what I did now. Maybe they've decided they don't like my intro video. They're going to cut out all my videos that have any guns, even flintlocks in them, probably is what they're doing. I hope not, because then I've got no ideas for an intro video. All right, so looking at the governor's response. All right, so the governor, at least through his lawyers, his explanation of why he gets to wield these powers in the way that he does, he almost refers to him having, the same powers that all these other governors have. They act as if it's like some vague concept of emergency gubernatorial powers that was handed down from our founding fathers or from English common law. And that's just not the case. There are federal cases out there, and even some Supreme Court cases discussing emergency actions by a governor or an executive branch. But that doesn't mean that it applies to Jim Justice in the same way. The fact is that the emergency powers that he's been using, they don't come from outer space. They don't come from the federal case law. They don't come from federal law. They don't come from the federal constitution. They don't come from the West Virginia Constitution. The only place that they come from is the West Virginia statute on emergency powers. That's the authority that the West Virginia legislature has given to the governor. And if you read any of his executive orders, it recites that statute. It's West Virginia Code 1556. And that is the emergency powers statute in West Virginia. And there's one particular subsection in that statute that he has utilized, and he puts the same sentence in all of the executive orders. And that is the authority that he's claiming in the executive orders to act. And that's the only authority he has. There is no broad, just general gubernatorial emergency authority that you get to wield. You have to look at the statute to see what's authorized. Okay, so one of the, like I said, the state constitutional claim is really our strongest component of challenge, our case of challenging the mask mandates or any of these executive orders, because the state constitution says that only the legislature can create law, that the governor can't do that, and no one branch can exercise the powers of the other. And it also says that the state constitution will never be suspended under any circumstances, not even in a time of war. So therefore, even if the West Virginia legislature tried to give the governor the power to rule as a dictator for 9 months, they couldn't do that because the Constitution doesn't allow them to do that. So what their lawyers, the governor's lawyers, are saying is that there's nothing the federal judiciary can do. Said basically, you can't stop us because that's a state law issue. And the 11th Amendment says that an individual cannot sue any state agency, state official in their official capacity in federal court, period. That's the 11th Amendment. It's a type of immunity. So they claim the 11th Amendment on what is our strongest point, that he's in violation of the state constitution, that he's acting without authority, that there's a separation of powers issue. So much of our reply was focused on clarifying that the 11th Amendment does not bar a federal court from stopping Jim Justice, because we're not seeking to litigate any state issues. We think the state issue is, we can litigate that in state court, but we're just asking for the federal constitutional issues to be litigated, and that therefore that's not barred by the 11th Amendment. So there's two different defendants in that case. One is the health inspector himself, and that is the individual. That's just like if you sue a police officer, you include the individual police officer as a defendant in the case. Because it's a health inspector, that is as a defendant. So at the county level, that's a defendant in the case, just like in a police officer case he would be. The state defendant is the governor in his in his official capacity. You usually can't do that if you are seeking money damages. So that's why we're not seeking money damages against the governor. We're seeking only injunctive relief. So we're only seeking the declaration of what's constitutional, what's not constitutional in regards to the governor. And there's an exception to the 11th Amendment, as I point out in our reply, that if you're seeking just prospective injunctive relief, then the state cannot claim 11th Amendment immunity. And that's what we're doing. And nor can this health inspector claim 11th Amendment immunity. So I had to lay all that out in our reply. All right, so what I think the governor failed to realize is that state constitutional law and statutory law is still relevant to determining federal constitutional violations. Because picture this scenario: a police officer arrests somebody for a crime that doesn't exist. Whatever the case may be, you have a wrongful arrest. A guy got arrested for a crime that's not even on the books. So he sues, the victim sues in federal court, civil rights violation. Of course, there would be jurisdiction in federal court to litigate that claim and to seek damages against that police officer for violation of civil rights, for wrongful arrest, or violation of Fourth Amendment. Now, there's a state law component to that, in that the court would have to look to see whether or not the law that the man was arrested under was an actual law under the state. So you just have to look to see if there was applicable state law to support the arrest. So state law is always a component, or is most of the time a component, to civil rights litigation. And it's really no different here. We're not trying to litigate the state constitution itself in federal court. We're litigating federal constitutional violations by pointing to the fact that there is no state constitutional authority for the governor to act in the way he's been acting, nor is there any state statutory authority. So just by pointing to state law, we're not violating, or we're not allowing the governor to be able to get out of the case via the 11th Amendment. So sort of some confusing issues, but it's the same reason why in federal court, if a state trooper beats somebody up, it's caught on video, and you want to sue them for excessive force in federal court, Section 1983 claim, you can sue trooper friendly individually. That's how it would go. It's how it always goes. You never can sue trooper friendly and the West Virginia State Police. You can't do it. What would happen? The defendant would file a motion to dismiss, or at least whoever's representing state police would file a motion to dismiss for based on the 11th Amendment, and it would be granted. So it's the same thing. But you might be able to include the state police or some official capacity agent or officer or supervisor of the state police if you're just seeking some sort of prospective injunctive relief against them. So, but that generally wouldn't be done, because if you're suing, you're usually looking for money damages. So as long as you're not looking for money damages, so that's sort of the arguments that go back and forth in this litigation. So I laid out exactly what the emergency powers of the governor are. Now, the Governor Justice relies primarily, if you look at all of his executive orders, you'll see the same sentence in all of his executive orders. And that's found in West Virginia Code 15-5-6, and that's subsection C6. And it goes like this. Quote, to control ingress and egress to and from a disaster area or an area where large-scale threat exists, the movement of persons within the area and the occupancy of premises therein. That's it. That's the sentence under which Governor Justice has been ruling our state for the past 9 months. Controlling people coming and going from a disaster area, or people who are on a premises in a disaster area. He stretched that to mean that he can just declare the entire state a disaster area, and therefore logically can control any person in any building or any person going or coming from any location in the entire state. I mean, that's literally the logical, the leap in logic that the governor has made, and with no challenge. The statute says nothing more than that as far as his authority. I mean, it's to control ingress and egress to and from a disaster area or an area where large-scale threat exists, the movement of persons within the area and the occupancy of the premises therein. So they think that can be stretched to do everything that he's doing, the mask mandate, the stay-at-home order, etc. Now, the problem is that the West Virginia Constitution says that he can't create law. Legislative activity can only be done by the legislature, and the governor can't do it. I mean, it's very clear. We have an express separation of powers. The Constitution also says that it will never be suspended, not even in a time of war. So there's been this sort of assumption that the emergency powers it's sort of a temporary thing where we don't have to follow the Constitution for a period of time. And that could be the case in certain states. Remember, we're dealing with the West Virginia Constitution. It's possible that the Ohio Constitution doesn't say that. I don't know. But the West Virginia Constitution says that it will never be suspended. So it's always applicable. Always applicable, even in a time of war. And it furthermore says that any departure from that or violation thereof under the plea of necessity or any other plea, i.e. coronavirus, is subversive of good government and tends to anarchy and despotism. That's West Virginia Constitution, Article 1, Section 3. To the contrary, it says that the people's legislative authority lies in the Senate and the House of Delegates, and no one branch can control the other. So the Constitution also, what about a situation where the people's safety is threatened or the public welfare requires it? You have a novel coronavirus. Well, what does the Constitution provide for that scenario? Well, it says that the governor may convene the legislature by proclamation whenever, in his opinion, the public safety or welfare shall require it. So if he thinks the public safety or welfare is threatened, he may convene the legislature by his very own proclamation. So if he thinks a law needs to be changed in the interest of public safety, or a law needs to be modified in the interest of the public welfare, he may convene the legislature, and the legislature has the sole authority to make that law. So if he wants a mask mandate, he has to convene the legislature, and they can debate the issue, and they can pass a mask mandate, or they can refuse to pass a mask mandate. I mean, that is the process that is outlined in our Constitution. There's no excuse to not following that. There's no excuse. You can't use the excuse of an emergency or of a necessity, because the Constitution cuts off that possibility on its face. It says it doesn't matter what you say the necessity is. It doesn't matter if we're in a nuclear war. It's always, in effect, you always have to follow the Constitution. And there is West Virginia case law that says that even if, for some reason, the West Virginia legislature wanted to just give its legislative powers away to a governor, even if they wanted to give the governor this ability, the West Virginia case law from 1992 says that a governor or the legislature cannot empower the executive branch with the ability to declare future criminal violations of present statutes without violating state constitutional separation of powers. Well, what does that mean? In that 1992 case, the legislature tried to allow the Board of Pharmacy, under the governor, a part of the executive branch, to create new criminal violations. It had to do with prescription pills. Tried to say that new activities were going to be illegal that were not already statutory criminal violations. The Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. That's a legislative power that cannot be delegated to the executive branch. So even if the West Virginia legislature, back when they passed the emergency powers statute, even if they said, now, Mr. Governor, if you feel it's necessary, you can take conduct that is completely legal now, and you can make that illegal all on your own without us making it illegal. They couldn't do that. They couldn't do that. So then how could the governor say, I'm issuing this mask mandate because I love you all and I don't want anybody to be hurt or die, and I think that wearing masks is the best way to fight this pandemic. Therefore, because a certain amount of people aren't going to obey it, I'm going to make that a criminal violation. In fact, it's going to be obstruction of justice. And I want business owners to call police, and I want the police to arrest you for obstruction of justice, because it's all in the name of safety. So isn't that the same thing of creating future criminal violations of present statutes, i.e. obstruction? How is that not violation of separation of powers? That's exactly what it is. It's exactly what the West Virginia Supreme Court said back in 1992 was unconstitutional. So 9 months now of living under a state of emergency rule under one man, his response presumes that wearing a mask, it's a scientific fact that it reduces the spread of COVID-19. It presumes and mocks anyone who disagrees with it. In fact, the governor called us in his response wrong and conspiratorial, I believe. It basically mocks us. Now, and I cited this in our reply brief, but the only widespread scientific study that's been done so far on mask usage was the Danish study that found that it did not prove at all that wearing a mask had any effect, and in fact, quite to the contrary, was detrimental. Let me see if I can find that. So the Danish study found no evidence that wearing a mask significantly minimizes people's risk of contracting COVID-19. The randomized controlled trial found no statistically significant difference in coronavirus infection rates between mask wearers and non-mask wearers. To the contrary, the data showed that mask usage may actually increase the likelihood of infection. Quote, the recommendation to wear surgical masks to supplement other public health measures did not reduce the SARS-CoV-2 infection rate among wearers by more than 50% in a community with modest infection rates, some degree of social distancing, and uncommon general mask use. And I have that up here. Let me share that. Nope, not that one. Okay, here it is. All right. This is the study itself. And it's done by it is in a journal, the Annals of Internal Medicine. So this is really the only major scientific study that we have so far. So when people accuse us of not respecting science or not believing in science or being anti-science, well, let's look at the science. This is science. This is the Annals of Internal Medicine. This is a respected, peer-reviewed medical journal discussing the only widespread study of masks that's taken place so far. And it's found not only did masks not help, there was evidence to show that it actually hurt. So the point is, and you can read this for yourself, but the point is that isn't this something that our legislature should be debating and deciding whether or not the science is right? Exactly. That's exactly why we have a legislature, to make those factual determinations, make those policy determinations. That's why we elect representatives to meet at the House of Legislature, and that's why we give them microphones to argue. And they can argue these things until their heart's content. They can form little committees, and they can go out and they can take testimony of witnesses and doctors and scientists, whatever the case may be. And that's the process of a constitutional republic. That's the process that the founding fathers of West Virginia set up in our Constitution. The process was never supposed to be that a pandemic occurs and all of a sudden we are ruled by one man who gets to exercise both executive and legislative powers. There's no authority for that. The only reason it's happened is because of the inaction of the legislative branch to stop them, and the inaction of the judicial branch, both in lawyers to file and plaintiffs to file challenges, and courts to act on those challenges. So just because the legislature hasn't tried hard enough to stop the governor, that's irrelevant to whether or not the governor's acting with the authority that is provided in the Constitution and statutes or isn't. The inaction of the legislature is irrelevant. The inaction of the judicial branch is irrelevant. It doesn't affect the analysis of whether something is constitutional or not. Yes, the legislature with a supermajority of both houses could call itself into session. Then once in the session, by a simple majority, they could end the state of emergency. But the problem, what happens if they can't get to a supermajority? So if I elected a representative, was I disenfranchised from my vote because my elected representative has had no say in whether or not to lock down our state or institute a mask mandate or order that people be arrested for violating those mandates? Yeah, I think my vote was disenfranchised. And all of our votes were disenfranchised. And that's a federally protected right. What about restaurant owners, barbershop owners, nail salon owners? don't they have federally protected due process rights to not have their property taken, their livelihoods taken, their businesses shut down, their licenses taken without, just by decree of the governor, without notice or a hearing, without any ability to participate in the regulatory or the legislative process? Because that's what's happened. Just the word of one man, the edict of one man says you do this or we close your business. And that's exactly what he threatened last Friday, was the closure of businesses if business owners didn't enforce his mandate. So how is that different than tyranny under a dictatorship? It's just a degree of tyranny. Tyranny can always be worse, and it could always be less stringent, but it's tyranny nonetheless. So Monday morning we'll have court, and hopefully at 10 o'clock, and we'll make our arguments before the federal court, and I really have no idea what will happen. It's worth the attempt to see what happens. You can't complain if you don't try. As they say, no asky, no giddy. But it's worth it also to try other avenues of relief, to try state court again, maybe to try other federal court challenges, depending on what facts we're presented with. The West Virginia legislature can still call itself into session. They could still go into session in December and rein this governor in, clip his wings, and bring the legislative, bring some constitutionality back to government in West Virginia. Why that hasn't happened yet, I don't know. I mean, what's the point of running for a legislative position and going through all that hassle and telling people that you want to be their elected representatives, and then all of a sudden the pandemic of the century hits, the event of all of our lifetimes, as our governor called it, occurs, and you just stay at home the entire time, and you don't want anything to do with it? You don't want to get to vote on whether or not our entire economy is going to be locked down for the first time in history? You don't want to vote on whether people are going to be going to jail for a year for not wearing a diaper on their face when it was perfectly legal to do so last time you were at the state capitol? Really? You don't want anything to do with that? I can't imagine. I mean, I know the answer, I think. Is that politicians don't always act on what they think is right or what they think is legal or the best thing for the state. A lot of times they act on, well, what are the repercussions for me if I do what I think is right? Am I still going to get the same financial support that I got before? Or am I going to get retaliation from powerful political figures if I don't? I can't speak or speculate what people may be thinking, but I mean, come on, man. There's been 40 plus other states. I think every state in the continental United States has had some sort of legislative activity in response to COVID-19, if not had a full-blown session of their legislature. I think maybe Montana might be the other one that hasn't. But all of our surrounding states, they've had legislative activity. Virginia just had a special session of their legislature where they discussed things such as the scope of emergency powers that we're going to allow the governor to have, or whether or not we're going to make it a criminal violation for if somebody violates the governor's mandates. So even Virginia, under Governor Northam, as much of a tyrant as he is, they've at least had their elected representatives be able to come to the state capitol and give them some sort of a voice. Ohio, Pennsylvania, they've all had some sort of legislative activity. I believe Pennsylvania has had like 200 and something bills introduced and discussed and debated during this period of time. We've had zero. We've had nothing. Call your state legislator. They've had no involvement in this process whatsoever, unless perhaps maybe their leadership, and they've been involved in some smoky backroom discussions with the governor's office. See, I know the Danish study didn't help on the constitutionality aspect, but it proves there's no scientific grounds for justice to have implemented a mask mandate. Yeah, I mean, if it doesn't help on the constitutionality aspect, then why did they bring it up in their response? Because they think that it hurts our claims to act like there's this safety threat by not wearing a mask, and we just have to do this. So they have that presumption that it's just a necessity that they have to do. And yeah, I only pointed out because we can't allow that to make its way into a court ruling that, look, this is a significant government interest that they need to implement because it has this scientific basis. Well, no, just because our COVID czar says it does, or just because Dr. Fauci told our COVID czar that it does before he said it didn't, that's not scientific proof. If we actually look at scientific studies, here is the first big one. And although it shouldn't be part of a constitutional evaluation, there's no doubt that it is now in 2020, but it shouldn't be. I've called the Tyrant Jim's office 5 times so far to voice my opinion. Well, be careful. Be careful. The first video that I tried to broadcast tonight got cut off. I'm not sure why it got cut off. It got censored. It might have gotten censored because I discussed something that had happened today. While I was working on this response, trying to get it finished, I was made aware by several people that this guy had been arrested for what was essentially sharing a meme of the governor. And it started to come out all over the news. Well, it just so happened that he reached out to me, the guy who was arrested. And I'm going to end up representing him. But he was arrested and charged with a felony for sharing a meme of the governor's face that he did not create, showing him on a wanted poster. Now, he was arrested for felony terroristic threats. And I'll post more on this specifically and describe exactly what the statute says terroristic threats are. But that's a scary prospect that somebody can be arrested and charged with a felony for sharing a meme. It's like this meme is deemed to be a felony. Now, if you read the words of what the guy said in the post that he shared, it's obvious that he's talking satirically or metaphorically. I mean, he's saying we need to bring back the old punishment that there was for treason and have public hangings and all that. He obviously wasn't saying, if you saw the tweet that he shared, he obviously wasn't saying, I'm going to go do this right now, or somebody else should go do this right now. It was kind of speaking metaphorically or satirically. But then compare what he actually wrote with the criminal charges themselves, which I haven't posted on the website yet, but I did share it already on Facebook because I haven't had time. But I'll post it on my website as well. Look at the actual words that they wrote, and it's actually very chilling. It's very scary. And the word chilling is an important one because that's actually what the Supreme Court uses to gauge something that's a suppression or a violation of your First Amendment rights. You know, is it government action that causes a chilling in the ordinary person of their ability to engage in protected political speech? And that's pretty damn chilling if 3 state troopers show up at your house and arrest you. It's pretty chilling for sharing a tweet, sharing a meme that you didn't even create. Now, obviously, words mean things, and you have to be careful how you word things, and you never want to word a political comment in such a way as that anyone can interpret that as, or construe that as a threat of any kind. But at the same time, the government should be very careful to not go around prosecuting people who weren't actually threats, didn't actually engage in a threat. Because what's going to happen is that is going to suppress free speech. It's going to make people afraid of speaking their mind. And of course, that's happening anyways. Well, let me try to get your comment off here. All right, sorry, I got long lost in the comments and questions. Barry, are you familiar with Count Dankula and the Nazi pug case from Scotland? No, I'm not, but it sounds like I should be. I'll look that up. Nuka-Cola, that's a reasonable question. Why are all these governors going along with this? Are they getting paid under the table? Both the West Virginia governor and the Ohio governor, both who are in the process of flexing what they believe to be their emergency power muscles right now. They're both supposedly Republican governors, and they're acting much like what you see from the Democrat governors. Why are they doing this? Why can't any of these other governors act like Governor Kristi Noem is in South Dakota, where she gives you advice and guidance on how to be safe and stay safe and keep your family safe and your neighbors safe, but tells you that she's not going to force you to do anything? Why can't, that's really the American way. Why can't our governors see things that way? Why do they act completely the opposite of that? Why do they act like a tyrant when they could, they could act like a patriot? Are they getting paid for it? I think it's just all about power. Power, absolute power, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's just the way government is. That's the way people are. Once they get, they're drunk with power, basically. They're drunk with power. The more power they have, the more they want. And I think it's just a power trip. Think about it. Governor Justice, he's gotten to live life as a Middle Eastern dictator, minus the harem, for the past 9 months. He's had more power than the monarchy of the UK has had. Probably any monarchy that in the past 1,000 years. He's really had no checks on his power. What's that like? The Ohio governor, same thing. He's been able to do whatever he wants. Why call in the legislature? Why deal with the legislature? And in fact, that's a good segue to my next point, is that if you read the governor's response that we received yesterday, one of the arguments in there, and this is just a really, what's the right word for it? This is I'll have to come back to that, because I can't even think about a word that's good enough to describe this argument. But one of the arguments that his lawyers put forth in their response was that he was allegedly reelected with 65% of the vote. Now, what on God's green earth does that have to do with any constitutional evaluation? What does it matter? The percentage rate, the percentage rate at which a governor was elected or reelected, as to whether or not his executive order was constitutional. It has absolutely nothing to do with it. But we've seen this from this governor before. Is he says, why can't you just wear a mask? Like 99% of the West Virginia people support wearing a mask. So you should wear a mask. It's completely constitutional. It's not like we're going to be unconstitutional and take your guns and everything. His best argument that he can articulate as to why his mask mandate is constitutional is because he was reelected at 65%. Well, that has nothing to do with the analysis of constitutionality in federal court. In fact, if it did, I could just say, well, you know what? It probably has more to do with the fact that anyone with an R next to their name in West Virginia got reelected actually at a percentage higher than 65%. You look at Trump, it was in my county, it was 80%. In some counties, Trump got more than 80% of the vote. And he carried the rest of them here in West Virginia, including the governor. He got to pretend like he was Trump's best friend and he was a Republican, he was a conservative. And he rode Trump's coattails, as did many people. That's the only reason. It wasn't because there was this overwhelming support for West Virginia being locked down and having our economy shut down and having to wear diapers on our face. That had nothing to do with the election. In fact, it was despite that he still got elected. I mean, hell, he should have gotten 80%, just like Trump did. Why didn't he get that much? Does that mean that his orders, his actions might be unconstitutional because he didn't get the percentage that Trump got? I mean, it's just an asinine argument that has nothing to do with the Constitution of either the West Virginia Constitution or the federal Constitution. All it is a big middle finger to my clients or anyone who feels like we do, that the Constitution means something, that it means what it says. It's just a big middle finger to us. Hey, Tabitha, that is like using the argument that an abuse victim decided to go back home to their abuser when they leave the hospital. 65% of voters felt as though they didn't have a choice. That's true. That's true. And I still didn't encounter one person, not one person, when I was helping Marshall Wilson campaign, not one person who ever said, but I just really like Jim Justice, or I like this policy or that policy. No, in fact, I've talked to dozens and dozens and dozens of people who absolutely dislike him with every grain of fiber in their body, including people who have worked for him. I mean, it seems that the only people I ever encountered that actually liked or wanted to vote for the governor had somehow depended on him for their income or for some political favor. Again, that's my opinion, just political speech. Don't send any state police to come arrest me. That's my First Amendment right to say that. That's just my opinion. Don't tase me, bro. All right. James, I refuse to be a servant of our government, will not submit. Again, you got to be careful what you say. As of today, Governor Justice is having people arrested for any political criticism that could be any way twisted into being a terroristic threat. And maybe that's another thing that the legislature needs to take up if they ever get back to session, is statutes like that. I mean, terroristic threats. At what point do we go from political criticism or satire, political cartoons, to now being a terrorist? I mean, you look at some of the political cartoons from the Jacksonian days. I mean, they were vicious political cartoons, and they're quite funny if you know the context. I mean, you look at them, and there's all sorts of violence in those cartoons. So any political cartoon, or the modern version of which would be a meme that has violence in it, does that mean that you're a terrorist? You're committing terroristic threats? I look forward to jumping more into that case and really doing a lot more research on that issue and similar prosecutions, which I'm sure have happened across the country. And it's, of course, when they do it to somebody, they'll pick somebody who is he's just a peasant, doesn't have the money to defend himself, doesn't have the power, the friends to defend him. Just pick on the little guy. And that's what bullies do. I'm still listening to their first recommendation, stop buying masks. They don't help, so save the masks for the nurses. Well, I used to go on, my father was is an orthopedic surgeon, and I grew up going on rounds with him. So I spent a lot of time in the hospital. I spent a lot of time in doctors' offices. But my dad was a surgeon. And so a lot of times he would take me to the hospitals with him in the middle of the night. He was chief of staff at 2 different hospitals. And they'd sit me down at the nurses' station, and the nurses would basically babysit me. But I got to come into some surgeries, and I got suited up and all that many different times. But I was always with my father in between. And the funny thing is he would always tell me, stop touching the railings. Because I want to touch the railings, in these hospital railings down every hospital corridor I walk down. I just want to touch all those railings. And so he'd say, John, hospitals are very dirty places. Just wash your hands as soon as you can. Stop touching the walls. Don't touch anything. And the funny thing is that the major source of protection, it seemed, for him and the other surgeons and the other medical staff that are basically bathing in people's blood and getting, bits of bone probably flying across the room at certain times is washing their hands. They wash their hands. But they continue to wash their hands throughout the day elsewhere in the hospital. Now, are they wearing the surgical masks in the hallways outside the operating room when they're dictating the medical information? Is their voice muffled because they don't want to take the mask off? No, they're not wearing masks anywhere around the hospital corridors. My entire childhood, I never saw them do that. I've never seen my father wear a mask outside in an operating room. And then all of a sudden, who would have thought 2020, it's now illegal to be in any public structure and not wearing one of these things on your face? Who would have ever guessed that? I mean, it's absolutely outrageous. If it was in a George Orwell book, it would get bad reviews for just being a little too over the top. So what can the governed do to stop this legally? I mean, you can file lawsuits and you can fight it. That's what you can do. And that's what we're trying to do. It's just hard to believe that there haven't been more legal challenges in our state other than just me, and I'm just one person. And I think there has been a challenge a couple times to some of the educational stuff. But it's just crazy that there hasn't been more outrage. All lawyers, like police officers, take an oath to uphold and obey, defend the Constitution of West Virginia and the federal Constitution. I mean, we take an oath as well. We have to be sworn into every courtroom. I got sworn into the Greenbrier County Circuit Court by the then circuit judge when I first came to West Virginia, and I got sworn into the West Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals by the entire Supreme Court at that time to practice there. I got sworn into the Southern District of West Virginia to practice there, had to take an oath. I got sworn into the Northern District of West Virginia. I had to take an oath and get sworn into the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond. So I've taken many oaths. So how can I not fight against the West Virginia Constitution being crumpled up and thrown in the trash can for 9 months? Am I supposed to just look the other way and say, well, yeah, but it's temporary. It's 14 days or it's 21 days, or we're rounding the curve? Well, now it's almost Thanksgiving. We've been in a state of emergency since March. At what point is temporary not temporary anymore? have I talked to Attorney General Morsi? I haven't. I saw his. I was pleased to see that he came out. I believe it was Tuesday or Wednesday, maybe Monday. After, well, here was the timeline. So Friday the 13th, the governor comes out and just has diarrhea of the mouth, and to the extent that his lawyers in this response had to actually say, it doesn't really matter what the governor says at his press conferences. All that matters is what was written in the executive orders. In other words, look at what the lawyers wrote and he signed, not what actually comes out of his mouth. They said that. Look it up. I'm paraphrasing, but they said that it doesn't make any difference what the governor says at a press conference. That's what they had to say, because it was just diarrhea of the mouth on Friday. Everybody was just pissed off. And so what happens Monday? After social media is on fire all weekend, the governor has another free campaign press conference. There's probably like 20 or 30 doomers that watch these things religiously, and no one else can stand to watch them. But what does he say is, well, of course I can't order people to be arrested. This is just a bad situation. Of course I can't order people arrested. I can't do that. But, this is a very serious, blah, 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 blah. So he backpedals on Monday. And then the attorney general came out. And this is, I think a lot of people were critical of him, very critical, in his own base of the fact that he did not support our first challenge to the state Supreme Court over these executive orders. So now it's like that scene in Braveheart where Mel Gibson turns to the Robert the Bruce and says, the people will follow you if you'll just lead. And it's sort of been like that with the attorney general. The people are looking for leadership in the government, somebody to do like some of these other attorney generals have done, or even like Donald Trump has done. And some of his criticism of these COVID tyranny restrictions. And so finally he issues a statement that goes on social media that says important announcement, referring to the governor's backpedaling. It looks like both the governor and I agree that the governor cannot legislate or create law. And, we think it's, he said, let's be clear. Nobody's going to, needs to be arrested for violation of any of these executive orders. Again, I'm paraphrasing. It's about what it said. So then the governor, boom, he shoots right back saying, well, he's disappointed in the attorney general and he should understand that basically everybody's going to die if we don't do this, or something, obviously paraphrasing there. And so then all the news reports are that the attorney general and the governor are at odds. And since all that's happened, I haven't talked to the attorney general, but I'm glad that he did what he did. But talk is cheap too. There's more to do. There's more to do. There's the barber. He did help the barber in the Eastern Panhandle, Les Jenkins, get out from under the administrative tyranny of where they're trying to take his barber license. But what he doesn't mention is that he's still being prosecuted by the county prosecutor in Berkeley County, West Virginia. They're still prosecuting this 72 or 73-year-old military veteran barber of 50 years who has no other income but being a barber, for cutting 7 people's hair during the governor's unconstitutional lockdown. He's still being prosecuted for what the governor said is the violation of his executive orders. Obstruction. Now, the attorney general says that shouldn't be a criminal violation. The governor has himself backpedaled and said that shouldn't be a criminal violation. But yet this man is still being prosecuted. Now, to be fair to both the governor and the attorney general, the way our government is set up in West Virginia, they do not have the authority to call off an elected county prosecutor. An elected county prosecutor is a very powerful position, and as I talked about during the election, you need to pay attention to the prosecutor races because they're partisan, Republican versus Democrat races. And these can be important decisions that they make. I don't know who the prosecutor is there in Berkeley County, but if you live there, you might want to pay attention because this man has been to court 5 times for cutting 7 people's hair. He's had to go to court 5 times. He hasn't been able to get a ruling on his motion to dismiss based on these constitutional grounds. And his next court date is in January. I talked to him a couple of days ago. I mean, that is just absolutely disgraceful. And while it's great that the attorney general helped him and get rid of the administrative bureaucrats who were coming after his barber license, it'd be nice if he could exert some sort of influence or pressure on that county prosecutor to get rid of that criminal prosecution. I mean, that's just absolutely disgraceful and shameful. And why doesn't the governor talk about that? The Federalist website had an article on what had happened with this man. So I look forward to doing more on that in the future, but it is what it is. Are the governments and governor, are they working for us or are they working against us? Well, to our face, they're always here to help us. They're here to protect us. But in reality, as Ronald Reagan said, as I say all the time, the 9 scariest words in the English language are, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help. Because the government never does. Government is never the answer. The answer, in my opinion, is always freedom. Freedom, more freedom. Less laws, more freedom. Less taxes, more freedom. That will be the answer to everything. Politicians work for themselves. Absolutely. Let's see. Here it is. The comments were coming so fast that I missed the one I wanted to click on. James Spencer, we had a revolution over taxation without representation. Now we're in the same boat again. Well, we're in a worse boat. We're in a worse boat. Because what were they talking about with no taxation without representation? Well, we had the stamp acts, and then we had the intolerable acts. So the intolerable acts, that was like the nail in the coffin. And that was just to give a big middle finger to the people in Boston, to the patriots there. And that was specifically designed just to piss them off and just to show them that the monarchy or that the parliament, even in England, they could tax them just because they wanted to, and there's nothing they can do about it. And so no taxation without representation. Yeah, that all had to do with economic tyranny. And we're just talking about taxes and import-export stuff. So if we're exporting our tobacco, even though we're British subjects, just like anybody is in England, we by law now have to sell our product to England and make them the middleman, the rich, wealthy class over there, the same people who are trading in slaves and populating North America and the Caribbean with slaves, the wealthy class of England. We have to bring our tobacco over there so they can be the middleman. They get their cut, and then it gets to go to France or wherever. When we could just sell it directly to France or Portugal or wherever our market is. Instead, we're having to give England, the wealthy jerks in England, a cut. So this is just profit. They're cutting into our profits. But profits were life. I mean, there was never any guarantee of. There were no government guarantees back then that if you couldn't make a living, that the government was going to take care of you. I mean, if you didn't make a living, your family actually literally would suffer. So they were hampering our ability to enjoy the fruits of our labor, to build wealth. And yeah, we were willing to go patriot on them and and engage in a revolutionary war. That was not over. That was not over anything else other than economic restrictions, primarily. Now, there were the 27 grievances that we included in our Declaration of Independence, but the economic freedom is, I mean, that's what freedom is all about. That's what our country was founded on. And now, fast forward to 2020, you're exactly right, James. We've allowed just a governor of a state to completely lock down our entire economy, or close down businesses, and to make us stay at home. I mean, how outrageous is that? Just think about it. And this came up in I mentioned it somewhat in some of our constitutional claims, and it came up in the Pennsylvania case issued by Judge William Stickman in the Western District of Pennsylvania. 66-page opinion that I think is one of the most well-written judicial opinions I've ever read. And for context, Governor Justice's lawyers called that opinion a, quote, aberration. They denigrated it. But it's a wonderful opinion written by a new federal appointee to the bench, appointed by President Trump. And for 66 pages, he laid out exactly why he thought the Pennsylvania governor was acting in violation of the Constitution, the federal Constitution. And I quoted that at length in our lawsuit on behalf of the restaurant in Putnam County. So yeah, the governor completely denigrated that and basically took the position that, look at all the federal opinions out there from around the country regarding these coronavirus restrictions. They all find them to be constitutional. Therefore, there's nothing you can do. And that's the position that they take to this federal court. And part of my argument in our reply, if you read it, is that, yeah, but these are apples and oranges. You know, some of these states, like Virginia, their legislatures have met and decided whether or not they want these mandates to continue or whether there should be criminal violations for violating them. You can't just assume that West Virginia is like any of these other states. So before you weigh federal constitutionality, like, you know, is there is the state action unconstitutional because it goes too far, and and so on and so forth. In West Virginia, we shouldn't even get to that first step because there's no legal state action. There's no authority whatsoever for the governor to enact the mask mandate. The only constitutional authority would be to ask for the legislature to enact a mask mandate with a criminal penalty. It's the only constitutional way, and there's no way around that. But they just they argue for this vague notion of some general emergency power authority that all governors have. Well, show me where that comes from. That's not even a thing. Brian R., are you booked for 2021 yet? I believe it will be the year of lawsuits. Yeah, Brian, I should be hunting right now, or preparing to hunt in the morning. I should be hunting all next week because it's our opening rifle season here in West Virginia. And I do always make the mistake of not setting aside that time ahead of time, and it gets booked up. But even if I had set it aside, I'm going to be working all through it. I'll have to go at some point because some people are depending on me. But yeah, I'm completely booked through every minute of my day, just about. Let's see. Masks can be made from such a wide variety of materials, not to mention the ones people are wearing are not getting tested or rated for a virus. All right. That reminds me of something. I have a good point. All right. So if these people agree, it's like if Democrats agree with mask mandates, they want mask mandates for whatever sick reason, and they support mask mandates. Therefore, they're completely okay with an unconstitutional mask mandate just because they like it. They support mask mandates. So let's change the facts. Let's say let's say Kristi Noem now. Let's say Kristi Noem creates an executive order in South Dakota that says, let's say it mandates condom usage for everybody because there has been, an epidemic of HIV, whatever. So we're going to implement mandatory condom usage. Or let's see, we could even change the facts up the other direction. We could say Governor Kristi Noem finds that a certain abortions after a certain period are endangering the safety of those children. That it's a safety issue. It's a state of emergency. So she issues an executive order banning abortion after a certain period, or banning all abortion. Now, how is that different? It's not different at all. It's the exact same thing. It's just a different political issue. Now, of course, there's Roe versus Wade, federal Supreme Court case law, but that aside, you could use any other example. But take any issue that Democrats or leftists don't like, and then you have a governor do that via executive order, and you watch how they now are concerned with unconstitutional executive actions. So let's say that a governor, you could take anything that they don't like. A governor issues an executive order requiring a valid form of ID to vote. You got to vote in person because this is a threat. This is an emergency. You need to be there in person to vote, and you need to have ID. Well, they'd be jumping up and down. You can't do that. You can't do that by executive order. And the fact is a constitutional republic is not supposed to work by executive order. Executive orders have their place, but it's usually to declare that particular date is hereinafter statewide kitten day, or declaring a state flower day. Whatever. That's the sort of thing that these executive orders were traditionally meant to be. They were not supposed to take the place of legislation. And that's exactly the spot that we find ourselves in now. All right, I've got another example. In West Virginia, the leading cause of death, Bob, take that barber to lunch. Yes, I absolutely will take him to lunch next when I'm up there. I haven't met him in person. I've talked to him on the phone a bunch of times so far, but he's apparently a very popular guy and has a very successful barbershop. If you're ever there, it's in the Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia. It's a place called Inwood, West Virginia, and it's called Les's Place. It's a traditional barbershop. But here's my example. If my mind didn't go blank. All right. Before I saw your comment. Come on. What was my example? What reminded me of that? It's coming to me. The UCC, no. Start with the UCC, any particular part to study first. Oh, God, why would you do that to yourself? I've hardly encountered the UCC since I was in law school. That has to do with the sale of goods. Sale of goods by a business. Let's see. All right. Yeah. Wondering what the infection rates are in Muslim countries. Okay. What if we had an executive order? Of course, you look at the executive orders from Trump stopping immigration from some Muslim countries that have terrorism problems. Look how they flipped out about that. That's the same it's the same reasoning of executive order versus legislation. Of course, the president does have the ability to control the borders, to control immigration. That is within the constitutional authority of the governor. Roger, if you need an extra deer, I'll try to get an extra one. Well, thanks, Roger. Hopefully I'll find the time to get a deer. Keith, do you practice law in other states? No, only in West Virginia and at the Fourth Circuit on federal appellate cases. And that's West Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. It's illegal to force medical care or medical device onto someone. If mask works, it's a medical device. All right. Now I remember what I was going to say. Thank you, Duck Dodgers. All right. West Virginia, the primary cause of death is still heart disease. And I think it's going to be outrageous for 2021 because the governor stopped people from getting routine medical treatment, which people for heart disease, they need medical treatment, even if it's not a complete necessity. So what is our death rate going to be from heart disease for 2021, for 2020? I think it's going to be up there. So what is stopping any governor, any West Virginia governor, could be the next one from saying, you know what, we have more deaths per year from heart disease than we had from COVID-19 or any other cause of death. And therefore, if we were going to declare a state of emergency for COVID-19, therefore, it's a much larger safety emergency for heart disease. Therefore, I'm issuing Executive Order 100-21 that says that, I hereby proclamate that it's mandated that all West Virginia citizens must drink diet soda. They can't drink regular sugared soda and nothing over 32 ounces. And it's furthermore mandated under my emergency power statute because it's a public health emergency that nobody can have cheeseburgers. Of course, our governor wouldn't do this for obvious reasons. But say we had just some skinny vegan governor and he was going to issue a cheeseburger mandate. Now, he declared a state of emergency because more people are dying of heart disease than ever died of COVID-19. So the same reasoning exists, and his health authorities at the WVU, his health czar, has found that there's this great public safety risk. The legislature just got out of session, so they're not in session. So he declares a state of emergency and he issues a cheeseburger mandate. And it requires, furthermore, that you have to eat you have to follow Michelle Obama's dietary guide. Let's just assume that this is a Democrat governor. He likes Michelle Obama's diet regimen that kids across the country absolutely hated and wouldn't eat. But let's just assume that it's healthy. And the doctors say that if you're overweight, you're extremely obese, if you stop eating all these cheeseburgers and stop drinking all of that Mountain Dew and you eat Michelle Obama's diet, then the science is 100% that you will get more healthy. Your heart disease will be decreased and you might survive, whereas you might have died. And so we're going to save, according to the science, X number of lives of people who would otherwise die from heart disease just by a governor issuing an executive order banning cheeseburgers and mandating healthy food. Now, that's an absurd example, but it's legally no different than what is happening now with the mask mandate. In fact, the science is less strong for masks than it is for a cheeseburger ban. I don't think there's any dispute that West Virginians are among the fattest population out of any state per capita in the country. I don't think there's any dispute about why that is, because they don't eat healthy, they eat too much and get too little exercise or other activity which would burn calories. It's not because they're born more likely necessary to just be subject to heart disease. So it's a behavioral activity. I mean, if government can mandate certain behavior, then they could cure the heart disease problem. So once we go down this road, we're in like, what was that guy's name? The mayor of New York City, Bloomberg. That's like, imagine Bloomberg as the governor of West Virginia. I mean, he's telling you can't drink certain sodas, and you can't use certain kind of straws. I mean, there's no end in sight. Once you allow the government to help you and to care for you and to provide for your safety, then you have no constitutional rights. They can do whatever they want. So if they can't, just think a cheeseburger ban. If they can't enact a cheeseburger ban, if a governor can't do that, or a soda ban here in West Virginia, then why would we allow a mask ban? Is it just because we really want to wear masks that bad? Or is it just because we're that scared? I don't know. It's interesting times that we live in. Tobacco, exactly. Somebody said, stop tobacco. Exactly. Now, there have been tobacco regulations. There have been bans of smoking in restaurants. And I was asked that. I did an interview with WCHS a few days ago, and I did like a 20, 30-minute interview. And we had a great conversation. I explained exactly the reasoning behind the legal challenges and the anchor. He understood. He's like, yeah, well, I guess, that's right. Because he would ask me, well, what's the difference between de Blasio? Yeah, what's the difference between no smoking in a restaurant, or the fact that you can't walk around naked, or a seatbelt law? And my response always is exactly that. Where does the seatbelt law come from? Well, you look it up. It's got a code section. Code meaning it's a West Virginia statute enacted by the legislature. Can you see why that's different? Now, what about the smoking bans? That's actually a closer example. Now, the smoking bans, they started when the legislature passed a statute that created these county health boards, these county health Nazis. And these little health boards in each county, they can then promulgate their own rules. So they can say, in our county, all restaurants have to ban smoking. And they have to put a sign up that says there's no smoking within 20 feet of this establishment, or whatever the case may be. So they did that in certain counties, and somebody challenged that to the West Virginia Supreme Court. And the West Virginia Supreme Court found it to be constitutional because the legislature said that these health boards could be created. And then the health boards followed their rules where people could participate with notice and a hearing, and they could have their say, and they passed the no smoking ban. And there's science behind that smoking is bad for your health. So they found it constitutional. Now, what is the difference in that process and what was done with the masks and no masks in the restaurant? And they were making the governor's requirements for wearing a mask. They made people in the restaurant who were completely socially distanced wear a mask anyways. Now, there was no science showing that there was any risk of infecting somebody with COVID-19 through the handling of food. And the CDC's guidelines still say that there's no science supporting the allegation or the assumption, the speculation that you can give somebody COVID-19 through handling food if you're otherwise socially distanced. But nevertheless, with no science supporting it, they still mandated it. Now, it wasn't through a West Virginia legislature enactment, and it wasn't even through a county health board regulation where people could object to it and participate in it and have their say. It was just through the governor's mandate. So how is that different? If you can't see why that's different, then I think you're part of the problem because you don't care. But it's going to come back to bite you because although you might agree with a mask mandate, well, what happens when you get the condom mandate or the cheeseburger mandate or the Mountain Dew mandate? And it would be a never-ending thing with government. Wouldn't you rather have more freedom and make government follow the process? If you want to make something, not that we need any new laws. We don't need any more criminal violations. Everything's illegal already anyways. But if you want to make yet another one, you got to follow the rules. You got to go through the process. David, since it was mentioned about a mask being used as a medical device, that reminds me of the case between the FDA and General Mills regarding their cholesterol claims on the packaging of Cheerios. If that's the case, how can experts or even people who are not medical professionals making these claims about masks without the proof? Good question. I don't even have an answer for that. I mean, I think the question answers the question as well. I suppose they call that a rhetorical question, but good point. See, they're forcing me to pull permits to fix the house. They said if I don't, they will foreclose on me and demo the property, even though I never had a mortgage on it. Well, yeah, that sounds like a pretty crappy situation. Hamburger breath isn't deadly. All right. Well, thanks for joining, Gene. That's the doomer point of view. Hamburger breath isn't deadly. Neither is the breath of a person who is not who doesn't have COVID-19. So a person who does not have COVID-19, their breath is not deadly, just like hamburger breath isn't deadly. What's your point? So because we don't know who might be infected, and since anybody could potentially be infected, we have to assume that everybody is infected. So, I mean, that's your point. I mean, I understand it. But, as I've said way too many times now, my rights don't end where your fear begins, Gene. So, if my constitutional rights, if my freedoms were subject to Gene the Doomer being scared or being afraid of my breath, then I guess I don't really have any rights at all. I mean, do some of you Doomers, do you drive? Do you get out on the road? I mean, anytime you drive anywhere, you're taking your life in your hands, are you not? You know that you could be killed. You could be decapitated by a tractor trailer instantly. It really, anytime you're on an interstate. Yet you do it anyways. Why? Because you know that the risk is fairly low, and you have the ability to make safe decisions, be a defensive driver, and it's worth the risk. Otherwise, you can't just not drive in 2020, especially in the United States, such a large country. You have to drive. In West Virginia, you can't take the subway to work. You have to drive. So yeah, there's risk, but it's minimal, and you're willing to take it. It's no different with a virus or a pandemic. You can't just destroy the entire economy just to make sure that people are safe, because the point of not just human life but our country, the American dream, is not just to merely survive, but it's to thrive. I mean, if our only goal was to survive, we could do kind of like we're doing now and just take our elderly citizens and put them out to pasture, so to speak. We can put them in these sanitary little rooms where they have no contact with their family. They can't go to Thanksgiving dinner. They can't see the whoever's on the other side of their individual cell, and their food gets delivered to them through a completely sanitary food delivery system. And they can visit their families via teleconference, via whatever, Zoom or Skype, whatever the case may be. And we absolutely will keep them 100% alive and COVID free or virus free, whatever the virus is. And we can do that for younger people too. Heck, we can take somebody who's 18 years old and we can keep them alive till they're 90 years old. And we can probably achieve a 100% non-virus lifetime from the age of 18 to 90 by keeping somebody in this preservation bubble that we've created. I mean, we can create 100% survival rates if we really want to. But what is the problem with that is that why survive if life like that is not going to be worth living? Is most of us don't want to live like that. We are willing to take risks, but we want to thrive. We want to have a happy life. We want to pursue the American dream. And that's just that's the discussion that we're going to have. That's why freedom is scary, because the point is to try to explain to the doomers that yeah, freedom is scary. Freedom is scary. You're going to have to deal with some amount of fear in order to live in a free world. This pandemic has caused me PTSD. Well, I don't doubt that there's been all sorts of craziness caused, as far as unintended consequences go, caused by this, by people being locked down, staying in their house. There's been all sorts of divorces, crimes that wouldn't have been otherwise committed, suicides that wouldn't have otherwise occurred. All right. Where I live, we all wear a mask out of respect for our community. We don't have a hissy fit about a stupid mask. Well, it's not about whether or not to wear a mask. It's about being forced under threat of arrest to wear a mask. It's, if you can't tell the difference, then I don't know what to say. I mean, those are two different things. Nobody has ever stopped you from wearing as big of a mask as you've ever wanted to wear. No one's ever stopped you from leaving the house. In fact, you're the one who wants to stop other people. Gene, you don't know if I have asthma and it harms me to wear a mask. Or this guy I met the other day, last weekend, who's a military veteran, he was shot in one of his lungs, and it hurt him terribly to wear a mask, but he was doing it anyways, just so he didn't get some sort of punitive action taken against him. Now, is that kind of you, Gene, to make that man wear a mask, even though it hurts him? Even assuming he doesn't have COVID-19, is that kind of you to make that guy wear a mask, or to make an asthmatic child wear a mask? No, I don't think that's kind of you. I don't think that's kind of you at all. Thought that was Bernie Sanders for a minute, but no, it's Bill Clinton. Appreciate the comment. Don't viruses enter through the eyes? That's that's a good question. That's a good question. The fact is even science aside, you go in a grocery store, or you watch some of these big time doomer maskers when they confront people, these Karens, and watch how many times they touch their face when they otherwise would not have touched their face. The one big Karen incident that I had in a coffee shop, I was just trying to get a coffee and go. Nobody's wearing a mask because they're sitting down eating coffee, but you were expected to, when you walk in between the cash register and the seat, to wear a mask, of course. So they confront me and they're flipping out, saying, "Don't you know that there's a virus? Have you heard of the coronavirus?" And they're telling me the way they do things in New York. And meanwhile, they're getting so agitated that they're touching their mask as they talk about it, and they're flipping it up and down, and they're sticking their hands on their face. I mean, they're touching their face and their eyes, exponentially more times than they ever would have touched their face anyways, just because they had a mask on. So even assuming that the science was behind wearing a mask in otherwise normal everyday situations where one wouldn't wear a mask, my own observation shows that people are adjusting their masks. They're messing with their mask. They're putting on a dirty mask because they had it hanging from their rearview mirror, or they had it stuffed in their pocket and they've worn it 100 times. My own experience from working with metal tells me that that airborne particles get in and out of a mask anyways, because I go through a mask every 15 minutes when I'm working with metal. I mean, it's obvious to me that there are people that it's going to be detrimental to because they're touching their face constantly. But I'm not allowed to have an opinion. But my opinion is that it's kind to allow people to have the freedom of choosing of whether or not they want to walk around with a diaper on their face, especially if they're one of these individuals that has a medical reason not to wear a mask. And you know what, Gene? It's none of your damn business what their medical condition is. Oh, rather be anonymous. Just to be clear, no Clinton fan. I completely understand. I appreciate the comment. Pat Sparks, if the virus is deadly as proclaimed, should we not have biohazard bins provided for safe disposal? That's a good point. I never thought about that. Yeah, I mean, shouldn't even the government be providing us? I mean, if healthcare is a right, shouldn't the government be providing us with masks? And we should get, I mean, how many masks do we get? Should we have one for like every 10 minutes? Every 10 minutes, we should put on a new mask. I mean, it's just, the whole thing is absolutely absurd. Mask stops viruses like underwear stops farts. But I guess some of the doomers would say that underwear does stop some of the larger substances, and a mask could stop some larger substances as well. And that's about as much as we need to discuss that. Let's see. Plastic bag over the head would be more effective in reducing airborne transmission if that even exists. Yeah, well, why even stop at a mask? Maybe we should have one of those protective collars on, like a doll, like we make the dogs wear after their surgery. Why not? If it makes us safer and makes those around us safer because we're kind, then we should be willing to go to any extreme and make that mandated under the force of law. So sipping coffee makes one safe and not wearing one while walking does. That's stupid logic. Well, even you go to any of these places where they're being forced to enforce it, and they admit to you that it's stupid. I mean, it's absolutely stupid to walk to the seat with a mask, then take off the mask. And then you've got the server who is wearing a mask, but going back and forth to each of these tables with people without masks. So, I mean, if it really spreads that easily, I mean, it's going to spread anyways. I mean, your only real option is to not be in the restaurant. But shouldn't people have the choice to decide whether or not they want to expose themselves to that risk? Just like the same decision they make when they get in the car every day. They don't need the government to tell them whether or not driving is too dangerous. And yes, I know the government does tell us speed limits, but again, where did the speed limits come from? They came from the legislatures. All right, so it's Friday, and it's about that time for a cigar and some whiskey. So I appreciate you watching and hearing me rant about this. And again, you can check out the legal filings from the governor from yesterday and our response today on the website, civilrightslawyer.com. And I will hopefully be doing another live video at some point next week, but not before we go into court. And that's going to be Monday morning, as of now, 10 o'clock. We'll be in federal court on the mask mandate challenge. We've hauled the governor to court. And of course, it's always an uphill battle challenging these things in federal court, as you've seen from the vast majority of them around the country, which have been unsuccessful. But if you don't try, you can't win. No asky, no giddy. So we're going to try on Monday, and if we win, we'll celebrate, and if we don't win, we'll come up with Plan B. So stay tuned for the results on that, and I appreciate you watching, and hopefully I can find out why YouTube censored my first video. This is the second attempt, and let me set this thing up to go out in a better way than I came in here. All right, so watch the website. I'll post an update, hopefully at some point on Monday, and pay attention to my Facebook page. You'll probably see something there first. But until then, I'll make sure you subscribe on YouTube if they haven't completely kicked my channel off by now, and set up for notifications. And I'll see you next time. Enjoy your Friday.